Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Independent Sponsor Update, brought to you by Frisch Capital Partners, where every day we're helping independent sponsors around the country put together the capital to purchase their companies. So Bob, today I want to talk about the LOI, or the letter of intent, and the common mistakes that independent sponsors make. Because the LOI is one of the critical parts of any transaction, but especially for an independent sponsor. You have to have it. And there's some common mistakes that you've seen through the years that I've experienced. And so I want to talk about those for a second to try to head off any potential mistakes somebody might make. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
All right, so before we even dive into the mistakes, let's talk about what the LOI is to give people a frame of reference.
Not a problem. In my opinion, the LOI is easily, for an independent sponsor, the most important agreement in the transaction for them. Without it, they virtually don't have anything that's of value to the capital sources. This agreement, the letter of intent, the LOI as it's called, locks the deal up for the independent sponsor. At that point, they hold the cards. And that LOI is the cards. It's like the ace, it's like having 4 aces if he in a game of cards. If he's got that LOI, that independent sponsor rules.
So the independent sponsor has to have the LOI, but what's the function of the LOI in the transaction besides giving them the exclusivity? And this is where I think it's important to differentiate.
Sure. The seller and the buyer being the independent sponsor, have come together and they're trying to work out a transaction. The seller's interested in how much he's selling his company for. That's probably the most important thing to a seller. The cash or various amounts that he might get, whether that's other equity or whatever it may be, he's getting something for selling his company. That's in the LOI, how much the company is being purchased for. The second most important thing is, as you pointed out, Drew, the exclusivity period. How long does that independent sponsor have where nobody else is allowed to bid for that company? The seller is not allowed to talk to anybody else. It's locked up for that independent sponsor to actually go, raise the capital, put the deal together, and buy the company at that price in the LOI. Exclusivity period and purchase price.
Gotcha. So it gives them exclusivity for a specific price that they've pre-negotiated. And so what are some of the common mistakes that people make around this thing?
Well, let's look at it this way. The independent sponsor gets crazy about the purchase price. And rightfully so. He should be concerned about how much he's purchasing that company for. There's a certain amount that's reasonable, and there's no doubt about it. But oftentimes, and probably the number one mistake, is they over-negotiate. There's an appropriate amount of negotiation up front, and then there's over-negotiating. He starts to piss off the seller. He starts to get the seller all agitated. You don't want the seller agitated. Not before you sign the letter of intent. You need that letter of intent. That's probably the number one mistake.
So over-negotiating, keeping in mind, guys, it's a simple document. It's saying, this is the price and this is the exclusivity.
So the second mistake they make is they don't give them enough time. They don't give themselves enough time. The independent sponsor has to have a certain amount of time to let, for instance, my firm or any other firm, or for himself for that matter, go and get the capital to put the deal together. Independent sponsors don't have a big fund behind them. They need a certain amount of time. That time usually is around 90 to 120 days, but if they can get longer and start going out to 150 days, or they get 120 with an automatic extension as long as things are going well, that's the kind of things that are critical. Independent sponsor never wants to lose a deal because they ran out of time.
Yeah, so average that we usually see is 90 or 120 days with an automatic extension as long as progress is being made.
That's correct. And you're talking about time to close the deal. You got to keep in mind there are a lot of participants in a transaction. The capital sources, the lawyers, the quality of earnings. There are things that are going on in this deal that take time. And you need the time in the LOI to allow you to do all the processes needed to come to closing.
Gotcha. And it always takes longer than you want it to, or that you think it should. So give yourself as much time as possible. Okay, so that's the second mistake. What's the third mistake?
Well, I'd have to say the independent sponsor has to realize he has to be patient. This is a process. Somebody's selling their company. They're selling their company, which kind of leads into the fourth issue, and they're kind of tied together. 95, 96, 7% of our companies in the United States are private companies. These companies have been built by World War II veterans, many of them, and families have had a family business for a long time. There's emotion attached to it. It's not an easy process for them. How many times have they sold the company? Never. Usually never. They might have had it for 20, 40, 50 years. They've never sold the company. Independent sponsors have to realize that. Realize there's emotion. It's personal. They have to be patient. That's the one that's critical. They have to have understanding. Independent sponsors win companies because the sellers like them. How are you liked? Because you're understanding, you're patient. That's critical.
You know, I can really relate to that last one. Having started several companies on my own, and most of them from scratch, there's a certain level of blood, sweat, and tears that you invest into a transaction, and somebody that's coming in to buy it doesn't always realize the emotional baggage that is connected, or the memories, or the sense of ownership. It's almost as if that company has become another member of the family.
It is.
And so when you're separating with that, there's a lot of emotion attached with it. And so to your point, patience is incredibly important, and keeping in mind the perspective that the seller has about what is going on.
And that's critical. And for the independent sponsor, he has to understand that. He has to relate to that. He can't start sending people in to do due diligence before the letter of intent is signed, because they may, and it's happened before, they may upset the seller. They may not be the same as that person, the understanding. So the independent sponsor has to realize his responsibility, that what he's dealing with is a baby. You know, it's been raised by the family or the CEO or whoever, the owner of the company. It's his baby. Don't mess too much.
So the initial due diligence, if I'm hearing you too, is more about understanding what's going on in the company, as opposed to telling them everything you're going to fix or enhance or change or whatever. And so that's important to understand, because again, going back to that, you don't want to piss off the seller. You don't want to make them feel uneasy by potentially highlighting things they might not done as well as you feel they should have.
Drew, you said it better than I ever could.
All right, so there you go, guys. 4 mistakes that people make. First one, don't over negotiate your LOI. The second one, give yourselves as much exclusivity as possible. The third one, be patient. Understand the mindset of the seller, and understand that the seller has a lot of emotion attached to that given company. Check out our other videos on the Independent Sponsor Update to learn more tips and techniques about how your experience as an independent sponsor can be successful. And check us out at frischcapital.com. That's Frisch capital.com. Thanks guys for watching. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Drew.